And blessed to be a part of your day. Kevin Miller in the morning here. Phone number is 580-5436, 580-KIDO. We're joined by Dr. Paul Nathanson, a gender relations academic professor. We're going to talk a little bit about men and their place in our culture today. Dr. Nathanson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about the culture today. Spreading misandry, the teaching of contempt for men in the popular culture. Are men an endangered species?
Not biologically, I think, but
sure.
in a larger sense, yes. I mean, I think that masculine identity has been presented to society as something toxic or evil, and it's very hard to form a healthy identity as a man in this society. And one result of that is, well, several results. One of them is that more and more men are simply turning against society in various antisocial or illegal ways. Others are dropping out. The dropout rate for men from school is much higher than for girls. The suicide rate is 3 or 4 times the size of the suicide rate for girls and women. So there is a problem out there. I call it identity harassment, and we need to face it just the way we need to face sexual harassment as another problem.
Well, what would be the correct way to face it?
Well, in the first place, we have to start getting some knowledge rather than just listening to people rant about their hatreds. And I think that the ultimate method that we need to employ is what I call intersexual dialogue, which is not the same as debate in which one side has to win over the other, but rather something based on empathy and the acknowledgement that the other is not simply crazed, oppressive group, but rather real people who have problems, and we have to talk about those. I use interreligious dialogue as the basis for what I'm saying here. And we do have interreligious dialogue now, but it's not as successful, I think, as it should be, because in democratic societies, we don't really need dialogue to ensure the safety of every group. We should be able to rely on the state to ensure that we don't get attacked by prejudice. But in the case of men and women, where we have to live together on intimate terms, we've got to rely on something more than the state. We've got to rely on our own resources to foster empathy and harmony.
Well, what are you saying?
Well, I'm saying we have a long, long way to go. I mean, I don't think that I'm not going to live long enough to see peace between men and women. We'll have peace in the Middle East before that. So I'm not giving you an optimistic answer. I think that the level of hostility is just increasing every day. When you have articles in the Washington Post and the Huffington Post by women who say that they can't love their sons because they're going to turn into men, or one article in the Washington Post which asked, in all seriousness, why can't we hate men? So hatred, is out of the closet. People are talking about their hatred, and they're not really questioning whether hatred is a morally legitimate way of outlook.
Well, how did men become the bad people? Considering we have, more rights for women these days, Hillary Clinton, the glass ceiling, why can't we just elevate both as opposed to tear down one to build up the other? Your examples that we're hearing at KIDO Talk Radio are, stunning when you hear people saying, I can't love my son because he's going to grow up to be a man. Well, you look at the course of history, and men have had a pretty big impact on it.
Yes, I think that it's probably been true throughout history that men and women have envied each other because they're slightly differently situated in the world and have slightly different problems, and the grass always looks greener on the other side. But I think something else is involved here. I think that we've had, for the past 50 years, the very successful emergence of a particular kind of feminism. I call it toxic feminism, but I also call it ideological feminism, and it's not egalitarian at all. Egalitarian feminism is one thing, but any kind of feminism that promotes the conspiracy theory of history, that all of history represents a titanic conspiracy of men to oppress women, when you have that kind of ideology, the results are going to be very, very dismal. And I think that's what we have now. And even now, until about 2 or 3 years ago, that kind of ideology was confined to college campuses, and people could say, well, yeah, they're academics, they're a bunch of idiots. But now it's gone mainstream, and that's the worst event in recent history.
Well, the fascinating thing about this is the unfortunate impact it's having on the young people, where you have a generation of men and boys growing up as second-class citizens. That's
right. And not only that, that's bad. But what's even worse is that many do not seem to have the resources to establish a healthy identity for themselves. Now, to have a healthy identity, whether it's personal or collective, means that you must be able to make at least one contribution to the larger society that is, first of all, distinctive, secondly, necessary for the entire community, and 3, publicly valued. Now, if you can't do that, and I think that men are having a very hard time doing that now, then the result is either that they never form a healthy identity, or, as I just said, they adopt a negative one as being better than no identity at all. So I think identity among men is a major problem, and I don't see many people talking about that. There is some talk about rights, paternity rights and custody, and all of these things have their place, but it's not ultimately about rights, it's about identity.
Dr. Paul Nathanson joining us. Kevin Miller in the morning here, KIDO Talk Radio. So if you're raising a young boy, if you're raising men today, what do you do where you have, like the University of Wyoming, you have staff members that are vilifying the slogan, "The world needs more cowboys." They say the cowboy is bad.
Yeah.
How do you fight this?
And there's another university, I forget which one now, but which has a mandatory course for entering boys, and that the course is designed to convince them that masculinity of any kind is toxic, and therefore they must have therapy to get to purge themselves of masculinity. Well, I think that there are people who are waking up to this, so that's a good sign. I also think that many women are waking up to this and not at all happy about this. Many of the people who write to me, in fact, are women who have sons, and they're saying, what is going on here? How do we counteract this? So there are some good signs, but really, we need to speak up. Men have not spoken up, or when they have spoken up, they've done so in violent ways or ways that are counterproductive rather than productive.
Not getting too philosophical here at KIDO Talk Radio, but men have been put into the Archie Bunker, George Jefferson, Neanderthal category, and if you're not Jerry Seinfeld or Alan Alda or Ray Romano, if you're not a wimp, you're a male chauvinist pig. So yeah. How do you, it's funny because I have people say, well, Kevin, you this and this, and you're no. We're redefining things. And Dr. Nathanson, you point this out. So where do men go? Where do young boys go? What is their future?
Well, I think the future is that men have got to have a healthy identity, and I think that the one way that they could do that is that the one feature of historic masculinity that remains, although it's endangered, is fatherhood. The idea that fathers have a distinctive and necessary role in family life, and it's not assistant motherhood, it's a distinct role. And I think that could be a source of a healthy identity. So that's still there. But in the meantime, fatherhood is being trivialized all over the place, publicly ridiculed. Laws are still enforced that make men wonder what is the point of sticking around in family life if they can have their children taken away from them at a moment's notice. But I think that I think fatherhood is the center could be the center of a worldview that does give men a chance to be healthy.
Dr. Nathanson, if people want more information on you and your thoughts in protecting men, what can they do, sir?
Well, my books that I've written with Catherine Young, they're all on Amazon. Just type in Nathanson or Paul Nathanson or Catherine Young for that matter, and we have 4 books out there so far.
Well, keep on about the good work. We'd love to have you back, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right, Dr. Nathanson on men. Coming up next in studio for you with me, Russ Fulcher. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Last time we saw you, it was primary night. What's changed in your world?
Oh, I don't know. I had a little excitement along the way. I decided to go get in a motorcycle wreck since the primary. But, hey, we're getting healthy and learning a few things the hard way when it comes to staying healthy. Let's put it that way. Well,
it's good to have you with us. By the way, if you'd like to talk to Russ, 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Can you go back to the primary night? What was that like for you? What was it like for your family, for your diehard supporters? We always talked about the Fulcher Army in the woods that have been with you for so long. Can you take us back to that?
You know, that was really gratifying. And we took a look at the map across the state, and we won every county except for one, and that was the smallest one by a handful of votes. And so it was a real strong night for us. And you know, there's so many people that help you get there. It's difficult to explain just how much they're needed, number one, and they're appreciated, number two. And it continues on, and it never ceases to amaze me, Kevin. On the 4th of July, we participated across the state in something like 9 different parades, and there were hundreds of people walking around with Russ Fulcher T-shirts on, and it's just humbling. But what that really makes me do is it makes me just want to do this job very well, and take that mentality and that honor and be very responsible with it.
What was it like, though, and we talk about your supporters, but your family, because it's like being in the military, you know, in the police. It's not just the candidate. It's just not the official. It's the family that has to sacrifice as well.
Yeah, and lots of times they take it worse. You know, they take sure. The abuse that comes along the way. And, you know, I'm the candidate, and I choose to be in this situation. But your family necessarily has not made that decision. I mean, they're along for the ride and certainly dedicated and all that kind of thing. But when the negative press comes out, or when there's something that's negative that's said or done, you know, they take the fallout. And so, families in any kind of a political campaign or something that's you gotta be very careful with, and just very thankful for it, because you can't do it without them.
You know, you were like the canary in the coal mine during the campaign because you had run statewide before 4 years ago. And I always enjoy telling this story. You know, had the electorate changed in 4 years? You had some insight on that, obviously, from your firsthand experience.
Yes. In 2014, I was in the governor's race for it was a short run. We came very close, as you may recall, but it was a short run, and the dynamic was significantly different. Kevin, President Obama was in the White House, and a lot of the electorate believed that the governor of the state is kind of that last line of defense between socialism and a republic. And so there was significant urgency. And to be honest, it was not difficult to generate enthusiasm and get a lot of support in a short period of time when I went out and started communicating my message. This time, it was significantly different. Donald Trump's in the White House. The same supporters, the same people are there, but the urgency level just wasn't quite the same. It was, well, President Trump is there. He's going to take care of things. We don't have that same fire in the belly, if you will. Now,
sure, that same fire in the belly. And it's interesting when you're talking about this, because many people had set up their models on what had happened in 2014 or 2016. And I believe, again, because of your experience, knowing the state, knowing the area, you were the first one to say that it's different than it was when you were running in a very successful campaign against Butch Otter. Very different. And do you believe it was President Trump? Do you think it was Obama? What do you think changed here in the state of Idaho with the electorate of being, from fired up to being not as fired up?
I think it's human nature when you have someone that let's face it, Donald Trump is wildly popular in Idaho. And there is that segment that really doesn't appreciate him. But I'm just telling you, we do the polling. We take a look at all the numbers, and he is wildly popular here. And so when you have someone like that people have a lot of confidence in, or they believe is doing the right thing, there's this natural tendency to let them do it. I mean, Idahoans are independent, kind of a hands-off type of culture in our state to a large extent. And so if we don't have to jump into some of these things, then we tend not to. And I think we were simply seeing that play out in the political realm.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And one more question before we get to the sweet prince of the Treasure Valley, who's always the first caller with you, Tea Party Bob. I've been fascinated because I guess the electorate changed from 2016 to 2018 when we're talking about President Trump, because remember, people were lukewarm to him. It was a Ted Cruz state. You had a lot of Cruz delegates. So it wasn't like it was one of these East Coast states that you say Donald Trump and you're rolling. Fascinating how it went from cautiously optimistic about Trump or suspicious to embracing him during your run.
No question about it. And when he came in and he had that, he employed that style of just communicating and acting like he just doesn't give a rip about political correctness or what the media has to say. He just won Idahoans over with that style. Plus, he pumped a confidence into the economy. Economies are interesting things. They kind of have a life of their own, and they function off of confidence. And he was able to and is able to get people's confidence up in the economy. And so that is a winning formula in this state.
Russ Fulcher joining us. Still candidate for Congress, right?
Yeah. We got a race in November. We're taking it serious, man. We're out campaigning.
KIDO Talk Radio. All right, out to the sweet prince of the Treasure Valley, Tea Party Bob, with our great friend Senator Fulcher. Good morning, Tea Party Bob. Thank you for your patience.
Good morning, Kevin. Good morning, Senator Fulcher. I have a two-part question. Both have to do with taxes. The first one is, what does the senator think about the changes that they're going to make in the tax code that are going to help the private business owners, the small business owners here in Idaho? How does he think that's going to affect us here? The other is, I kind of like to have his input, since you talk so much about infrastructure and the changes that are taking place in the Treasure Valley. How would he deal with these urban developments that are going on and this tremendous growth that's taking place? How do you curtail it?
Great questions.
Those are the two questions.
Yeah,
Does that really have something to do with Congress, though?
Yeah, well, it does eventually, because you're going to have more voters.
I think you're reaching.
I never reach.
It's always good to talk with Tea Party Bob. So whether it has to do with Congress or not, we're going to have that conversation. Bob, on the small business tax structure, you are probably aware Idaho has an inordinately large percentage of small businesses in the state. It really is, and across the board with all different industries, including farms, including retail, including industrial, including resource-based businesses. So this is a big deal in our state. And so it's one thing to pass the tax reform that has been passed, but that was kind of targeted mostly at the larger entities. It's had a positive impact for them. Now that reform needs to continue and impact the smaller businesses and provide some relief for them. People, and in particular business owners, will reinvest if they have the money to do it. They will grow. They will expand. They will increase the wages for their employees if they have that revenue stream. And so the best thing we can do to stimulate economic growth is to put more of those resources in people's pocket, especially with our small businesses. On the infrastructure front, so many ways we can go with that. I heard the earlier conversations that were being had this morning, and I think you might know our family has had a small farm in this area and has had since the 1800s on my mother's side, early 1900s on my father's side. And so we've gone through that. And you get in an environment where if you're the farmer, you can't afford to operate in a state or in an area where there's a tremendous amount of urban growth. The taxes get too high. Frankly, just the ramifications of all the traffic and the people change the whole dynamic, and it makes it very, very difficult to operate. And so it would be nice in a lot of ways to leave those in place because of the setting and whatnot, but it makes it impractical for the farmer or for the dairyman. And so the best tool they've got is potentially the ability to move and take advantage of the economic benefit that they've got. But in terms of our local government, the way they plan is a huge part of this whole thing. The comprehensive plans that they lay out just needs to be complementary. It needs to be in conjunction with the culture we've got, so that we don't lose that neighborhood friendliness that Idaho is so well known for.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
All right, 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Let's talk about some issues in policy. What will this campaign be about in running against the Democrat here? Your vision versus the vision of a Nancy Pelosi or Bernie Sanders when we're talking about representing Idaho?
Anytime you go into a campaign, and especially a general, the major philosophical difference between the parties is your default base of is the government best suited to be in control of our situation, or is the individual, is the family most best suited? And so this election campaign is going to be no different. The Democrat side across the country is going to put forth multiple solutions to issues, to problems that include more control by government. And the Republican side is going to be doing just the reverse. They're going to put issues and solutions on the table that are steered more towards families and individuals being the solution. I'm the latter, and that is my default position. I think that it's in line with our Constitution, with our republic, that the individual is the pinnacle of governance in this nation. And so the more control, the more power, if you will, that we enable our citizens to have, the better off generally we're going to be. Now, there is a role of government. There's a proper role of government, and that's outlined in the Constitution. But that struggle is politics. That struggle is what we're dealing with in the general election, and it's been that way since the beginning of our republic, and it's going to continue to be that way.
Senator Russ Fulcher joining us. Kevin Miller in the morning here, KIDO Talk Radio. We take a look at Congress, and Russ, people in the Treasure Valley, they have such a high opinion of you. Your favorabilities are high, and yet Congress nationally is not doing well. What will you bring to the table? The president smacks Congress, the media smacks Congress. Do you really want this job?
I'm excited about it. And I know that might sound counterintuitive because I know that the approval ratings are so low. But, Kevin, it's an honor. And I take it so personally and so seriously. You mentioned some of the people that have helped me earlier today. And I look at those folks and I see them walking in 100-degree heat, some of whom I've hardly met personally, on my behalf. And I can give you 1,000 stories, but people have invested in me in that regard. They have shown confidence in me, and I take that very seriously. And it's an honor to represent others in a republic. And as revolting as it might sound, assuming that I win and prevail, and I'm casting a vote or I'm debating on the House floor, I am Kevin Miller at that time. I am Tea Party Bob at that time because I'm representing you. And so that is a system that we have, and I'm so honored by that. And so taking that attitude, along with probably the largest freshman class that is going to move into Congress in the last 50 years, that I think is an opportunity for us to show this country that, hey, look, there's a whole new leadership in town, and there's a whole new team on the field, and we need to communicate an honorable way of governing.
Russ Fulcher joining us, 580-5436, 580-KIDO. So let's talk about a new class, Russ, but on the other hand, we have some of the age-old issues, the budget, the debt, the deficit, all these things going on from your time in state government here, your time as a local business owner, now, and your time in the technology field with Micron and others and representing this area in international travel. Let's talk a little bit about the debt and net deficit because we've kind of put that off. But as Senator Crapo will tell you, that's a big problem.
That is a huge problem. And I don't think most people realize the albatross that is around our neck, if you will, when you start calculating how much that we pay as taxpayers just in debt service every month or every day. And so I believe that President Trump's general approach is right. It needs to be coupled, and I'll back up for a second. That general approach has been to do tax reform to try to stimulate growth, and that's a key ingredient. You've got to have the growth. It needs to be coupled with some spending cuts. It needs to be coupled with some entitlement changes, and some structural changes within our system, and they're very, very difficult to do. We had that struggle in Idaho at the state level in about 2009 when tax revenue had fallen by about 23%. We had to make some hard decisions on what programs were funded, what were not, and it's even more difficult to do that when the economy is going well. But we have to go through that process. It's a painful but a healthy process. And so the growth side is being addressed. I think that's good. Now the spending side needs to be addressed.
Well, that's the challenge when you're thinking about the defense industry. Our Department of Defense, our military, has been really gutted by the previous administration for 8 years. We have to spend there. And yet we've got the expanding social programs going on, going into Congress with this freshman class, working with folks to try and come up with a new way of doing things. And taking a look at some things, simply we could say on talk radio, cut, but you've actually got to make the bread.
No question. And the areas that have to be focused on are probably the most difficult. The healthcare system. There's not a town hall that I've had across this state in the last year where that issue hasn't come up. And what is government's role in that? And to be honest, my default that I shared earlier in this interview is the same with healthcare. For the most part, that's best left in the hands of the private sector. It's best left in the hands of the individual. An individual who is an educated consumer, including for healthcare, is going to be the most efficient. They're going to choose the most efficient pathway. So that's one of the areas that needs to receive that focus, Kevin.
We have a question from Katie. The cost of childcare is extremely expensive, and the middle-class working families receive a very small tax credit for the amount they pay. What is your plan to change this to help the middle working class families when we're talking about, and Katie, thank you for that, the idea of expanding perhaps the child care tax credit. Your thoughts on that?
I'd like to see the overall tax burden reduce. If we have an overall tax structure that is less burdensome, and our families don't have we don't necessarily have to have that 2-income structure family, then there's one approach right there. The role of government, I believe, is best articulated by having a light hand. And if we simply keep or we push for a system where we have less burden on people and especially on our families, then that provides room for childcare, that provides room for education, that provides room for basically anything in the budget.
One more question, and then again, 580-5436-580-KIDO. And you're just learning this, obviously. Again, we still got the general election. But going from running a business, being a part of a major corporation, your own business, working with a state budget in Idaho, now the big enchilada, what do you expect the learning curve to be for you? I mean, you're no spring chicken. You've been around. But just the enormity of the task of just getting a handle on these things.
One of the things that has always energized me is the ability to learn. And we are all a product of our personal history. And I've been blessed to have a somewhat of a varied personal history. And so I take that into this job, a farm kid from Idaho with a fair amount of international experience and business experience at the local level as well. And I want to take that and try to apply it into this new role. That said, I'm not naive. Having operated in a government environment, I know that there's going to be a lot of frustrations. There's going to be a lot of red tape. You have to learn the system if you're going to function and be successful within it. This is the epicenter of the political world in Washington, D.C., not just for our nation, but for the world. And but there again, Kevin, that's kind of what excites me. This is an incredible time in history. And to have, at a minimum, a front row seat and maybe a small say in some of the direction that we take at this point in history is incredibly exciting.
More with Senator Fulcher next. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. All right, rejoined by Senator Fulcher. Kevin Miller in the morning here, KIDO Talk Radio, 580-5436-580-KIDO. Do you worry about the general election? Because we have seen a lot of folks coming in from out of state. And that's another thing that was fascinating about the campaign. The amount of people that were new to Idaho, that this was their first time voting in Idaho. Is that a cause of concern for people that think that the state is just reliably red? We're
definitely going through some change. And even though it was just 4 years ago that I had the last major campaign, the demographic has changed significantly. My family has been within spitting distance of this studio really for over 100 years, but yet there's such a large population increase here. We just don't know the same percentage, or we don't have contact with the same percentage we've had for decades. So it's a different electorate. My observation is this, Kevin. Generally speaking, and there's definitely exceptions, but generally speaking, the people coming here are coming here for a reason. And they're coming here because of what we have, and it's in something that they want. It's that family environment. It's that culture of friendliness. It's the potential to have economic opportunity without quite as high a cost of living. And the secret is how to keep that culture that way. But so far, and again, there is exceptions, and we've seen them, and we've seen evidence of that in our news media within the last month. But by and large, I would have to say that I've been impressed with the new people coming in and thankful for their attitude.
Okay, as a lifelong Idahoan, how do we maintain, and this is totally offbeat though, the great culture, the independence? Because you, again, we do a shtick here where, the folks coming in from other states where they're not using the turn signals. Idaho has spoiled me because people here are legitimately friendly. It's not uncommon for, you stop at a four-way stop and no one goes because everybody wants to give the other person the right of way. How do you maintain that when you have people coming in that, putting a strain on the infrastructure? We talked earlier about dairy farmers worried about whether or not they're going to have to move out because the land is so expensive. So as someone who is Idaho, what are your thoughts to the people on how to maintain that while welcoming other people in?
Well, we all have to be held accountable. And the local government here is at the top of that heap. Our school boards are at the top of that heap. My encouragement to good people is to, it's kind of like the military service. There's a need for good people. There's an obligation for good folks to take leadership roles. And especially if you're a seasoned Idaho native or veteran, you've been here a long time, consider filling one of those local city council seats or one of those local school board seats. Keep your irrigation district board. I mean, any of those types of things. Keep your culture, keep your historical knowledge, keep your value system in front of the people. Don't let that void be filled with others. And that's just one way, but our churches, our community organizations, our businesses, all of us have an obligation to stand up, hold people accountable in leadership roles for that value system, and espouse it in their own way with their own sphere of influence. And I realize that's probably a convoluted answer, but it's the best one I got.
And back with Senator Fulcher, Kevin Miller in the morning here, KIDO Talk Radio. Coming up next, Glenn Beck. Then it will be our friend Dave Ramsey, Sean Hannity, Lars Larson. Don't forget, tomorrow we'll be at Independence Indoor Shooting during the morning show. Firing off some weapons, proudly supporting the Second Amendment. Come out and join us. 576 Guns, our friends at Independence Indoor Shooting in Meridian. Back to you. The state of the Republican Party in Idaho. How are we doing? It's been an interesting run in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yes, and if you follow that closely, it's been a very dynamic one. But I would say things have stabilized, and I think it's got a lot better. We just finished our state convention in Pocatello here within the last month, and sometimes those are laced with a lot of friction and a lot of controversy, and it's natural, it's to be expected. But this time I didn't see so much of that, and for the most part, I think people realize what you and I are talking about before. We're coming up on that general election window. That is a time where, good, bad, or indifferent, you kind of have to unify a little bit and take a look at. We're at a binary decision point now. Okay, it's either the Republican candidate or the Democrat candidate. It may not be your candidate of choice,
right?
But that's the way it is. And so I think for the most part, right now, the party in Idaho is healthy, getting healthier, and rising to the challenge.
Well, it's time for everybody to come home.
It is.
Yeah. What about working with Congressman Simpson? Your thoughts?
It's going to be just fine. Congressman Simpson and I have had several different meetings. I actually reached out to him because he's the one member of the congressional delegation I did not serve with. I don't know very well personally, or did not know very well personally, so we've communicated a lot. There's no question. We look at the world a little bit differently, but if you analyze his congressional district versus mine, it's significantly different. He's got the INL, for example, the National Lab, massive federal installation within that. That's a big part of his constituency. That changes the dynamic on how you look at things because he's elected to serve that demographic. It's just different in my district. We're going to have some differences. We're going to look at things differently. But one thing that we agreed to do, and I look forward to, is we're going to be talking about all these things. We're going to be talking about votes before we have them, and we're going to work together to try to maximize our impact for the state of Idaho. It's going to work out fine.
Russ Fulcher, thank you, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. Always enjoy being on Kevin Miller.
We enjoy having you. Austin, great job today for Ray. Good day. God bless everyone. Keep the faith.